I think at a very critical junction with respect to overall attempts to deal with climate change. We've had serious upheavals in terms of geopolitics, in terms of alliances, in terms of international organizations. All of this not necessarily started, but certainly Trump has played a key role in these new developments. So addressing the broad picture on climate action, I think, is the main focus of this session. And I will start with Ms. Sdoukou, and the question will be, given that we seem to be underperforming on climate action, both globally and even within the EU, although the EU has generally been a bright spot in terms of leadership and policy, maybe less so in terms of transition within its own industry, for instance, the automobile industry and EVs. I was wondering, from your experience, what do you consider the main obstacles from moving from incremental change to serious transformative change that's needed if we're going to ever achieve the targets that we've set in Paris?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. My feeling when we're talking about underperforming is that the climate strategy, I have the feeling that when it was designed some years ago, we were more optimistic and there was stability. And we don't have these two elements, I think, today. So there is a need to reevaluate this climate strategy. And this is not because we do not care, actually, but because I think the world has changed. And I have the feeling as well, when we discuss about this issue, that we are not so passionate as we used to be some years ago. Obviously, the reason is that the global landscape has changed. The reason is that we see so many different things happening, the war in Ukraine, obviously, the crisis, the instability in the Middle East. We see inflation, we see food insecurity, energy prices. So when you have so different serious challenges, and when you actually see even bombs and missiles being exchanged, I'm wondering who's caring about meeting climate goals. So the priorities have been changed, inevitably, and given that these priorities have been changed, there is a need for all of us, either Europe or worldwide, to reevaluate our climate strategy. I think that in Europe, Mr. Papandreou, we are on track somehow. We are doing well. Let's say we are a leader in meeting climate goals. I read recently a report from European Commission that was based actually on the assessment of the national energy and climate plans. You know, the countries had submitted their NECPs, so there was an assessment there, and the EU said that we are well on track to reach 2030 climate goals. They say that we are going to achieve these 54% of emissions reductions by 2030, which is 1% less than the 55%, the goal of 2030. But of course, these energy and climate targets, if we want to have them clearly achievable, we would definitely need effective national policies, and we would need also credible financing. And I'm not sure if financing, which is a prerequisite, is really on the table. If we don't have these things, I think the implementation will fall short. The second thing I want to say is the elephant in the room, which is the trade war and the tariffs. And the fact that we have two, the major, actually, global emitters, US and China, who are in a constant rivalry today, I'm afraid that this will have also a global effect in Europe and everywhere, given the fact that they are manufacturers of clean technology. I'm not sure if this investment appetite will continue to be like that. We also need research and development as well. I mean, new technologies to be emerged. And given this uncertainty, the tariffs, the trade war, I'm not sure if we will continue to have this optimism to keep the pace. In your question, what are the challenges that the government has? I think, first of all, is the political parties for every state need to have a common approach for this issue. I'm not sure that we have common approaches in every country. Even in Greece, we are new democracy as a government, but I don't see in the issues of climate goals the other parties to be aligned with that. We always face a criticism about why you do this, why you do the other. The second thing is obviously the green transition needs a lot of money. So where we get this money, it costs a lot. And for sure, we cannot transfer these costs into the society. And we are also in a vicious circle, let's say, or in a spiral. Why I'm saying this? Because we are hit by, I don't know, a flood or a wildfire. We need to give money for that to restore. Yes, I'm finishing. And what? You watch the clock, okay. Just two challenges. So if you have like fires or floods or whatever, and you need to spend, let's say, 1% or 2% of the national GDP to restore an area, how you will find the money to meet the climate goals, to continue with the green transition? That's a second, for me, a big challenge. Not to mention, obviously, bureaucracy, red tape, permitting procedures, how we will attract investments on that. If we don't have, stable frameworks everywhere, in Greece, in Europe, or whatever. If it takes 7 years, for example, for someone to build a wind park. Lastly, we need to explain it better to the society. We need to explain better to the society why is this needed. We don't have the society yet as an alliance on that. I'm stopping here.
Let me stop you there, because David King has thought about this a lot and has been advising governments. And I imagine that you must despair at times, David, because you've got a guy in the States saying, drill, baby, drill. You've got a lot of popular pressure in the UK and elsewhere to go back from goals that were set. It's easy to set goals when they're far in the future. As you get nearer them, somehow it becomes difficult to get the popular support. So, David, over to you.
Well, thank you, and I will always avoid despair. I just want to start with a headline in the European papers today. It comes from a WHO report, and the headline is, "Lethal heat is Europe's new climate reality." Not ideology, climate reality. And what the report says is over the next 3 days in Europe, 4,500 people are very likely to die from heat stress. Southern Europe is reaching 46 degrees centigrade over these days. This is a new heat record for Central Europe. So what we're seeing already, and the demonstration is there for us today, is the reality of climate change with us. And I'm going to say we have entered a period of climate disasters of increasing intensity year on year, particularly over the last 5 years, as a result of the desultory response of the world's political systems to clear warnings from the climate scientists. And I'm, of course, one of those, and my despair may come across in those comments. Over the past 4 decades, these messages have been put across. Greenhouse gas levels are still rising, and rising more rapidly than before. Now, because we're adding methane leakage to the overall greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere. If you want to know why it's getting so bad, maybe the increased use of LNG lies behind this. So this big dependence on finding more gas to deal with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and I understand the nature of the crisis, is nevertheless creating major problems. Let me just, if I may, talk about not just the fossil fuel lobby, the lobby that defends the incumbent energy producers, and I'm afraid I felt I could hear it in the last discussion. But let me talk about loss and damage to these extreme weather events. Last year, well in excess of $500 billion globally was lost in infrastructure due to extreme weather events. There's been an actuarial analysis. The actuaries based in London working for the insurance and reinsurance sectors have got together with the climate scientists from the University of Exeter, produced a report where they're estimating going forward in time what loss and damage is likely to be over the coming years. And I want to stress this. In 25 years' time, they're saying 15%, plus or minus 5, there's an error margin on this, 15% of global GDP in infrastructure will be lost every year. Just 25 years' time. Are we addressing that problem as we go forward? Let me go through some of these extreme events that are already occurring. Vietnam. This is a country very close to sea level. Vietnam, third biggest rice producer in the world, we're now estimating will be under seawater, 85% of the landmass under seawater 2 to 3 months in the year, again in 25 years' time. I'm going to stick to 2050 as my predictive point. Rice production in Indonesia, Southeast China, is also at risk because those rice paddy fields are also close to sea level. We're looking at a massive loss of food production from that area for the world. Northeast Greece, I'm going back to extreme events. July 2023, I happened to be in Greece at that time. Forest fire, 2,000 square kilometers of forest burnt down. Northeast Greece, the area is called Deranakoria. And in that loss, we lost the biggest natural forest in Europe. And I'm going to say to you, we lost hotels, residences, schools, barns, but the loss is not so easily reversible. Let me take you to a totally different part of the world, southern Brazil. In southern Brazil, Porto Alegre, the capital of the southern state, suffered from extreme flooding. Now, all these events have never occurred of this kind before. 620,000 people were evacuated from that city. This is the biggest city in southern Brazil, and they were evacuated over a 4-week period, 190 deaths. And the point I'm making here is these extreme weather events, I could go on and on, are occurring around the world in a way they haven't before. We've all heard of Los Angeles and the fire that destroyed a big part of that great city, and that around $150 billion of loss and damage just from that one event. So I'm saying this is not an ideology, this is an imperative for action, and we need to see that we step up to the plate. What is the cause of this? It's greenhouse gas increases. Since that meeting in Paris 2015, I was one of the senior negotiators at that event. We have just seen greenhouse gases increase year on year. And as I've just said, methane emissions, and methane is 120 times more effective as a greenhouse gas than a carbon dioxide molecule. So methane is terrible. And methane leaking from all this methane recovery, methane also coming from cattle quite effectively. All of this is leading to greenhouse gas increases, and as predicted by the climate scientists, temperatures go up. Temperatures have now exceeded 1.5 degrees centigrade, and this is not reversing. In fact, this year we've reached an average global temperature rise of 1.7 degrees centigrade. That target of staying below 1.5 has been exceeded, and that was seen to be a level we should never go beyond.
David,
sorry, can I make one more point?
Sure.
The Arctic Circle, then I want to come back, but the Arctic Circle...
There will be lots of questions from Andreas a few afterwards, but carry on. Yeah.
The Arctic Circle, Greenland is now losing 30 million tons of ice per hour.
Wow.
Per hour, billions of tons a year. Now, Greenland has enough ice that when it's all melted, global sea levels will have risen by 6.5 meters. 6.5 meters. We certainly couldn't be sitting here. Or 24 feet. Is that happening irreversibly without deliberate human intervention? Yes, that is now happening irreversibly. So what we're looking at is global sea level rise, temperature rise, heat stress deaths. What do we do now? I want to come back and discuss that.
Excellent, you will. I like the way you said you're not going to despair, but Dimitris, and there will be lots of questions from Andreas afterwards. But Dimitris, please.
Sure. Wait, can I ask some questions? What?
Yeah, but we need to get, because I'm worried about this time. So if you ask a question now to...
Not to David.
Not to
Sir David.
Not to Sir
To Dimitri.
To Dimitri. Fine.
Yes, that's the objective.
Okay, go for it.
Spare 2 minutes for you.
Okay, well, I just want to say that, first of all, we just heard from our two previous speakers a huge disconnect between what the priorities the change in priorities that we've seen over the last few years, and of course, the fact that climate change really should be right at the center of our objectives and right at the top of our priorities. Now, Mr. Chanis, you may give us some hope because I know that you represent one of the hard-to-abate sectors, including cement, and we've seen, I know you're a leader in addressing these issues, so on the one hand, I want you to give us that hope and potentially to other hard-to-abate areas, but also tell us of the new challenges that you're confronting.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. If you don't mind, I'll switch to Greek for the sake of the suggestion of the organization. Καλημέρα σας. Εμείς, παρά τις διεθνείς προκλήσεις των τελευταίων ετών, είτε αυτές αφορούν το πεδίο των γεωπολιτικών αναταράξεων, τις πληθωριστικές πιέσεις, τις διαταραχές στις εφοδιαστικές αλυσίδες σε όλο τον κόσμο και την ενεργειακή κρίση βέβαια, παραμένουμε προσιλωμένοι και σαν Holcim διεθνώς, αλλά και σαν Ηρακλής στη χώρα, στο στόχο μας για τη δικιά μας, αν θέλετε, συνδρομή, στο στόχο στην επίτευξη του στόχου για μηδενικό αποτύπωμα άνθρακα μέχρι το 2050. Παραμένουμε προσιλωμένοι στο στόχο αυτό, επαναξιολογώντας βεβαίως, όπως είπε νωρίτερα και η κυρία Σδούκου, τις καταστάσεις και τις εξελίξεις. Παρ' όλα αυτά, τολμώ να πω ότι έχουμε ακολουθήσει μια στρατηγική την τελευταία δεκαετία, θα έλεγα, και προτιθέμεθα να ακολουθήσουμε τη στρατηγική αυτή για τα επόμενα χρόνια που έρχονται, η οποία αποδίδει και στο πεδίο της βελτίωσης της περιβαλλοντικής μας απόδοσης, αλλά και στο πεδίο της βελτίωσης της οικονομικής μας απόδοσης. Βλέπουμε δηλαδή ότι αυτά τα δύο συμβαδίζουν. Είμαστε περήφανοι που υλοποιούμε ένα συγκεκριμένο στρατηγικό πλάνο με βασικό μοχλό ένα επενδυτικό πλάνο αρκετά σημαντικό. Επενδύσαμε την τελευταία πενταετία στη χώρα 170 εκατομμύρια και έχουμε ένα πλάνο επενδύσεων 600 εκατομμυρίων ευρώ έως το 2030, κυρίως για την αναβάθμιση του τεχνολογικού μας εξοπλισμού. Και βλέπουμε ότι αυτές οι επενδύσεις αποδίδουν, αρκεί να πούμε ότι ως μία βιομηχανία εντάσσεως κεφαλαίου και βεβαίως μία hard to abate βιομηχανία, είδαμε τις εκπομπές μας για το πεδίο 1 σε πρώτο επίπεδο, από 670 κιλά ανά τόνο παραγόμενου προϊόντος τσιμέντου, δηλαδή το 2019, να μειώνονται κατά 24% μέσα σε 5 χρόνια. Μέσα από ένα πλάνο δράσεων που αφορά τη χρήση εναλλακτικών καυσίμων έναντι συμβατικών καυσίμων, χρήση εναλλακτικών πρώτων υλών έναντι παραδοσιακών πρώτων υλών, χρήση αποβλήτων εξκαφών, κατασκευών και κατεδαφίσεων, κάνοντας πράξη την κυκλικότητα στην κατασκευή, χρησιμοποιώντας υλικά τα οποία θα απορρίπτονταν με άλλο τρόπο πάλι στην παραγωγική διαδικασία. Έχουμε φτάσει λοιπόν σήμερα τις εκπομπές μας στα 540 κιλά ανά τόνο παραγόμενου προϊόντος και ο στόχος μας είναι στο 2030 να φτάσουμε στα 100 με 110 κιλά εκπομπών διοξιδίου του άνθρακα ανά τόνο παραγόμενου προϊόντος. Υπάρχει μια πολύ μεγάλη προσπάθεια η οποία γίνεται. Ένα πολύ μεγάλο κομμάτι της προσπάθειας αυτής ξεκίνησε μόλις τα τελευταία 1-1,5 χρόνια και είναι βεβαίως η επένδυση την οποία δρομολογούμε στο εργοστάσιο παραγωγής τσιμέντου στο Μιλάκι στην Εύβοια, μια επένδυση 400 εκατομμυρίων ευρώ, ένα project Carbon Capture and Storage, δέσμευσης και αποθήκευσης διοξιδίου του άνθρακα, το οποίο θα επιτρέψει στο εργοστάσιό μας στο Μιλάκι να μηδενίσει τις εκπομπές του. Θα σταματήσουμε να εκπέμπουμε από το 2030 και μετά 1 εκατομμύριο τόνους διοξιδίου του άνθρακα ετησίως και φιλοδοξούμε μέσα από αυτή την επένδυση να μπορέσουμε το 2030 να διαθέσουμε στην ελληνική αλλά και στη διεθνή αγορά τον πρώτο τόνο τσιμέντου με μηδενικό ανθρακικό αποτύπωμα. Η φιλοδοξία μας και ο στόχος μας είναι το 2030 το εργοστάσιό μας στην Εύβοια να είναι ένα από τα πρώτα 3 παγκοσμίως τα οποία θα έχουν μηδενικό ανθρακικό αποτύπωμα. I'm sparing the minute for Sir David.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Now I'd like to ask Mr. Chantavas, who represents in different forms the solar industry. We've got sometimes disparate narratives about what the energy mix will be coming in the future. Some believe it has to be a mix of everything. Certainly it has to be a mix of everything, but the actual proportions matter. There are many who believe that renewables are going to be the key to addressing the climate change, capturing the large majority of electrification in the economy. At the same time, we've seen critics raising questions, for instance, the disruption in Spain recently. So I would like you to both give us the sense, your view on how critical renewables will be in moving forward, why we're not moving as fast as we'd like, and whether what happened in Spain is something that can be attributed to renewables or it's another matter. A lot of questions. Huh?
No.
No, to you.
The more the better. Let me first respectfully disagree with many of the statements that we heard in the previous panel. And there were some very correct words that were mentioned. It was competitiveness, it was realism, it was pragmatism. And if we want to be realistic and pragmatic, and let's see the reality. And what is the reality? That renewable energy, wind, solar, together with storage these days, is the lowest cost of the option we have today to generate energy at the lowest cost all around the world. This is climate friendly because, as it was mentioned, we live now the consequences of the climate change. The climate change is here. And also it's geopolitically safe. Every country generates the energy they need in the country, without imports, without exports, and stuff like this. Some of them may be needed for balancing purposes, but the core generation happens in the country. So why we are here now to target the climate change, the energy transition targets, because this is maybe the easiest way to cover the fact that the policymakers have failed. And why the policymakers have failed? Because the policymakers didn't make the right decisions on time in a speedy way. The policymakers tackled only a part of the problem. And the part of the it's like saying I'm going to reform the transportation sector and I'm going to buy new wheels for the buses of a city. This is what happened in energy. Because there should have been an holistic approach there. We wanted to modernize and bring generation from renewables, and this is something that went pretty well in the market, while at the same time we needed to incorporate storage solutions, we needed to increase electricity demand, we needed to accelerate electrification, we needed to enable the creation of data centers and infrastructure that will consume this energy, and of course phase out the traditional sources of electricity. But we only did one of these 6, 7 parts in a kind of a, I would say, appropriate, timely way. So we cannot blame today renewables or the turn into climate change for the lack of competitiveness of Europe, for example, because this is a talk of the town in Brussels. And they try to compare themselves with other countries that have, at the same time, different means to achieve competitiveness. I mean, everybody wants to be as good in quality and speed with China, but nobody wants to live in China. Everybody wants to become like the US, but nobody wants to exercise power like the US, or even in labor, have employment at will and work for 20 years and get fired in one day without compensation. This is how their industry is competitive. So how can we say now that the fact that renewables bring you the fastest, the cheapest electricity, so this is one of the means that you can become competitive, is the elephant in the room and the problem. So this is where we are today. I think we need to reflect on this, see the reality. Of course, we need interconnections. Of course, we need to decide on the energy mix. Probably we have more solar than we need in Greece. We need to tackle it. We need to put storage. We need to put more wind, for example. We need to see the repowering solutions we have. We were one of the first countries in wind. But let's discuss these solutions, but not say, okay, this was a mistake. Let's go back to gas. Because this is, it's like saying, because we cannot find a way to use cars, let's start riding horses. This is what's happening. So, and since I have only 8 seconds, let me just reply on the Spanish issue. I think it was clear, it was announced by everybody that was involved, by regulatory authorities, the government of Spain, TSO. It was a grid problem. And this is what we are shouting all these years. The grid must be modernized in every country, and of course in the interconnection between the countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to ask Mr. Andriosopoulos about climate finance. We've seen that this has been a topic that's been raised in previous sessions, and today we raise it again as being critical for addressing the climate crisis. We're also in a world in which, priorities are shifting. Interest rates may be rising higher, which could be a big problem for some of the financing of renewables and so forth. What do you see as the main changes needed in sustainable finance to address these issues?
Okay, thank you for the question. Indeed, financing is very critical. We have lived through a world where we had stable pricing in terms of renewables if we go into the financing of renewable sector. Now we see uncertainty. So this volatility that comes into the market and to the forecasted revenue generation that we have, it definitely adds a bit of difficulty, let's say, in terms of the financing. However, we have a lot of ESG targets or green targets that all the industries, the sector, the financing sector as well, has and needs to apply, which makes it easier to attract, let's say, financing for green projects. So even though interest rates are increasing, costs have been going down, as Telis has said earlier, in terms of, for the renewable energy sector at least to become the most competitive in terms of electricity generation. So there are some positive and some negative effects that we have seen in the past, but at the end of the day, all this green push that we have seen in the finance sector makes green energy projects bankable and very appealing to the finance sector to finance. However, it's not only the green energy projects. We have discussed that also in the previous panel that there are other technologies there as well. If we group them into three categories of green projects, then you have the traditional project, because the world needs to keep going. We need to remind to everybody that we have today the biggest consumption of oil in the world than what we had in the past. In terms of barrels per day, we are more than 100 million barrels per day of consumption. So someone needs to address that question as well. We need to say that out loud, because absolute numbers matter. I like to speak about the world as a whole. If we are 10 billion people in 20 years from now, that means that we will need at least 30% more energy than what we are consuming in absolute terms than today. So somehow, we need to cover this gap. So what we need to bring realism and pragmatism again also into the financing of all of these projects, and we have seen that from US banks, for example, or from the US financial system, whereas the European financial system has been a little bit more let's say, less appealing in terms of financing natural gas projects or oil projects. There is regulatory uncertainty on this, but we see that the world will still need other products and other technologies as well to be able to electrify, and not only, but also to sustain our energy systems. And then we have a third group, which is the new technologies. And this is a lot of hype and a lot of discussion as well in Europe. We're talking about green hydrogen. We're talking about e-fuels, all of these very nice products that the technology exists, is not something that does not exist, but it's expensive to produce, needs to be supported. So we need to identify the tools, the mechanisms that can support the finance sector with all the difficulties that we mentioned before, to take a little bit out of this pain of the uncertainty on one hand and the expensiveness and the non-bankability that exists as of now, so that we are able to move forward. We talked about greening the industry. We have the CBAM, we have the carbon tax adjustment mechanism of Europe. If we keep making things more expensive, we need to be able to pay for all of this, the products at the end of the day, and to make the industry survive in this environment. If you don't have the incentives or you don't have the subsidies that even the cement industry has received to capture the CO2, this wouldn't be a viable project. So it's not only interest rates. The interest rate environment obviously does not help. It's always better when we have low-cost financing, but we need to see an array of different financial products and mechanisms and instruments that the politicians, the EU, need, on one hand, improvise them, but then they need to implement them, and to implement them in a fast way, because the acceleration that we need is not really there. We need to be able to move faster. It is a word that has been heard also in the previous panel, as much as we can, because yes, climate crisis does not wait, cannot wait, and also industry cannot wait, because we cannot put them hostages in this situation where the old situation, should not exist anymore, but the new situation that the companies, the new environment that they will be operating is not there yet, and it needs some support. So all of this needs to come together, and we need to make them fast with very decisive measures from all ends of the industry. And my final comment is that, given that I'm representing as well a business school here, and being with the hat of the professor, as some of us at least on this panel here, we need to educate our societies. We need to educate people. We need to educate the policy makers and the leaders that are taking this decision, because unfortunately, many of the times, they are not informed, they do not have the full picture, and this is the problem that is creating all the issues that we discussed earlier, and of course, educate the industry as well, and the executives, the leaders of tomorrow, that they need to understand what the reality of tomorrow will be so that they can take the right measures from today. They need to have the right tools. And this is our task as well as academics to be able to do that in the academic environment as well, which is usually the safest environment as well.
You're assuming that people want to be educated. This is, of
it's a
course,
big assumption.
a big. I want to ask a very pointy question, but let me just ask a question to David first. I mean, David, you were an advisor to a government, the Blair government, and you've had your warnings about what awaits us in terms of climate change are pretty dire. But I mean, as I think Juncker said, we all know what needs to happen, but if we do what needs to happen, we won't be elected. So if you were advising governments now, including the UK government, what would you do?
That's a very important question. When I was working with Tony Blair, we began a process of effectively demanding that utilities switched across to renewables. But the initial percentage that we were demanding was low, and they were putting the cost straight onto the consumers. The consumers didn't notice. But as we increased the amount required, the price came crashing down. In other words, as the marketplace increased to meet the demand, the price of renewables came crashing down. Today, the cheapest electricity in Britain, by the way, we have reduced our emissions since I joined by 54% since that time. And we have promised we will reduce our emissions by 81% by 2035, and we can deliver it. So we're on track. The cheapest form of electricity on our grid today, and this surprises everybody, including me, is offshore wind. The most expensive form of electricity today is gas. The price of gas is volatile. All of the fossil fuel products are volatile. They depend on demand. And so what we have created is a system which does produce competitive energy. Now, of course, if I'm really advising governments around the world, which, by the way, we are, the Climate Crisis Advisory Group is still traveling around the world talking to governments as we go. China is the exemplar, and I know a lot of people would be surprised to hear that. But we were in China in October. The Chinese, since that time, just this year, in 3 months, have produced 110 gigawatts just from solar panels alone. And last year, they produced 4 times that amount of solar energy onto their grid. 110 gigawatts is the total for Britain. And they did that in 3 to 4 months. So what we're looking at is also a country where nuclear power, they have put up 102 2-gigawatt nuclear power stations since 2010. China is focused on the following. All energy usage in China will be from electricity. All electricity will be produced without fossil fuel usage. That's their direction of travel, and I believe they will achieve that. It's not easy, because they have a big new middle class. Our estimate is 850 billion people were taken, 850 million people were taken out of poverty in the 20 years between 2000 and 2020 in China. That's a big new demand from a big new middle class. And they have to meet all that electricity demand by increasing it. They have the right focus. I do think it's unpopular to say China is a global leader on this issue, but nevertheless, watch what the Chinese are doing and mimic what they're doing. You could hardly do better.
Mm-hmm. Andreas.
Yeah, well, let me follow up on that question. When I said in the beginning that Europe is also underperforming, I was less focusing on reduction of carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse gases, which they've achieved their target, and more focusing on the point that you just raised, that while it's leader at the political front, at the level of the industry and actually what it's doing in terms of its fundamental transition and transformation, for instance, like EVs, it's lagging. And now of course, the automotive industries are going to China and trying to find from them the new technology and compete with them. So that, but one issue, and this also touches on solar and expansion of renewables, is that when we move towards renewables and we make, which can ultimately make energy cheaper, we also have something called the green paradox, which is that people find cheaper electricity, they start using more of it.
Jevons, yeah.
And of course, we have now data centers, and we're amazing at finding new uses of energy. Economists have a solution for that, but politicians don't like it, and that's a carbon tax or emission tradings. It was particularly disappointing with what happened in Canada, because they had a carbon tax which actually was quite ingenious, because they were returning money to the consumers, recovering the costs of the tax, and still it was unpopular. So, I want to ask, and this is open to anyone, how do we deal with what we see as more and more? We make it cheaper, we address it, but we still want more energy, we want more using it. If we're not going to use carbon taxes to do it, is there another way of approaching that? And then just the broader question that we raised from the beginning, this gap between our priorities. We're talking about carbon finance now, defense budget is increasing, which will be completely competing with that. How do we address this disconnect between our understanding that climate crisis remains the critical issue for our generations, and the fact that we're losing substantial time now in terms of priorities?
Just a quick point, Andreas. What is the status of the border carbon tax, which is supposed to be brought in by
2026?
Yeah, which is after all just next year. Is it still going to happen?
It's
or
still,
is this going to be a problem with the states and so on?
Certainly with the states, that's going to be a big issue, because the states are now negotiating on tariffs, and they don't like the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Yeah. So this is going to be a critical question for how Europe deals with that, because that's at the heart of their competitiveness approach. And certainly cement has, I think, issues with the CBAM, which might be interesting to hear. So I raised a lot of points. Anyone would like to address some of these or others?
I would love to answer that. So first of all, the Jevons, sorry, I apologize. The Jevons paradox has not followed through. So if we look at the production of electricity in the UK, we are switching across, again, all energy usage across to electricity, including electric vehicles on the road. Electric vehicles on the road, when do you charge them? You charge them at night when wind turbines are still producing electricity. The cost is extremely low. I know, I've got an electric vehicle. And so you're using electricity when demand is very low. You don't have to increase the amount of gigawatts to completely transform the car transport system into electric vehicles. So there are big advantages. The big driver for new electricity demand is actually AI. Right, so what we're seeing...
And that is a Jevons paradox, because that's going to go...
Well, you say it's a Jevons paradox, but there's a group of companies that made commitments to net zero, that have abandoned those commitments, and just building more and more AI, massive electricity usage. So this is a demand that has nothing to do with the Jevons paradox. What I do want to stress is Europe, from east to west, is a long distance. And if we could get interconnectors across Europe, we have massive advantages, because the sun is going to be shining in different parts of Europe at different times of the day. So I just push for that. Stop.
Okay, sorry. We've run out of time.
Yeah, but those are, Dimitri, I mean, you were asked a question by Andreas, so please.
I just wanted to say, first of all, I fully agree that we cannot afford, obviously, a climate strategy that is built on idealism alone, and that we should adapt this strategy into the real world, obviously. But as I was listening to David King advising, let's say, to the governments of what they should do, and obviously we all agree here that renewables is the cheapest way of having cheap energy. From my experience at the ministry, I think in the last 6 years, I think we were not persuasive to the citizens outside telling this story. Because when I was telling this story, you know what, green transition is beneficial for the economy, for the society, for everything, then immediately the question was coming up, then why, Ms. Sdoukou, we see an electricity bill that is keep on being increased? Because you need investments for grids, and you transfer these costs to the society, because the electricity price, I don't know what is happening in Europe, but keeps on being increased. So why you're telling us this story, and at the same time, when I go back at home, I get an electricity bill that is more and more increased. And here, I think that politicians lack of arguments on that, or tangible.
We're under extreme instructions from Nectaria. It must always be obeyed that we need to stop now. So, Dimitri, I asked you if we, well, you could have 20 seconds. Yeah. Okay, 20 seconds now.
Just a note, following on what Mr. Papandreou said. Look, all this energy transition, and when it comes to cement business, or European cement business, and in particular Greek cement business, is in the end a matter of viability of our business, a matter of viability of our plants. We as a company have experienced shutting down a plant in the previous decade, the crisis decade. We are struggling like hell to keep the rest of one surviving. And our way towards this goes through energy transition and fighting the climate change effects in our business.